Roderick Wai is an Associate Fellow on the Asia Programme at Chatham House. It's an independent policy institute based here in London. Roderick, thank you so much indeed for joining us. How much should we believe President Xi when he says China has no ambitions to become a global superpower? He says it quite often.
He does indeed say it quite often. And he is probably right in that very sort of simple way that China doesn't want to be a sort of equivalent of the United States or the former Soviet Union. But that said, China wants to be a power in the world that is respected throughout the world. And it wants to have its own voice in shaping the way that the world community goes forward.
Certainly, China's global reach has extended even further under the leadership of Xi Jinping. Is it even possible to say whether that influence has been more positive than negative or the other way around?
Well, I guess it depends on your perspective. I think for the Chinese, they are very pleased that their influence is increasing throughout the world in many places where it was not so strong in the past. But we have seen in the last few months, certainly, a number of issues where people are beginning to push back against Chinese perceived sort of, if you like, expansionism, and they are worried about the way that China is behaving in a very self-centered way in international affairs, and is not helping to develop and promote global norms in the way that we have become used to them.
How effective do you think the pushback is for those countries who would like to counter Beijing's growing influence? At the end of the day, sanctions, as announced by the United States on Thursday last week, surely those are only short-term measures. Can really anybody do anything when China decides this is the path we choose?
It depends what you mean by do anything. I think yes, sanctions have a role to play in international diplomacy, but you're absolutely right. They're not the be-all and end-all. And trying to coerce China or indeed any other country into behaving in a particular way is not going to be a long-term solution to the kind of problems that we face.
What do you make of the domestic situation inside China? For a long, long time, it's always said we do not interfere in other countries' internal affairs because, of course, it very much wants that reciprocity with other countries not commenting on what happens within China. But what about the authoritarianism within China itself? I mean, one thinks mostly, I suppose, immediately of the way that the central government is treating the Uyghur Muslims. Some people have said it's akin to almost some sort of genocide, that what's been going on there in Xinjiang province. What about the authoritarianism and how that has changed over the past couple of decades?
I think, in a nutshell, China is becoming a more authoritarian and more repressive society. And we see it, as you mentioned, in the way that national minorities are treated, in Xinjiang in particular, but also in Tibet and elsewhere. We see it in the way that human rights lawyers have been rounded up in the past couple of years. We see it in the way that the outspoken dissident Xu Jiangrun has been arrested, detained in the last 24 hours or so. Life is becoming much more difficult for those who wish to criticize, not necessarily in a hostile way, but in any way, the actions of the Chinese government. And Xi Jinping does seem to be set on making himself a much more powerful leader than China has been used to in recent years.
Roderick, for the non-experts, this whole Huawei story that's been going on for some time now, just to explain to them that 5G is considered the very essence of the future of the way we as individuals interact with the internet. That 5G will make every device connected to us, and therefore 5G becomes critical to infrastructure around the world and the way technology is going to develop. Huawei is probably the world's leading expert in 5G. So for the United States to say that the company is working for the state That's huge. And many American allies have taken on board American advice. It looks now as if the UK is on the verge of not using Huawei when it said it would. What evidence is there that you know of the American claim that Huawei works for the state?
Well, Huawei works within a system that is dominated by the Chinese party state, and Huawei is unable to do things that the party state disapproves of, and it also has to do things that the party state requires it to do, and that is in Chinese legislation. So it's not so much a question of how much it is a part of in formal terms, because in formal terms its ownership structure is rather odd and sort of private-ish, but it is the environment in which it operates, and quite frankly, it is an important consideration for the UK and other countries to put their whole of their national infrastructure, which essentially 5G is going to be, in the hands of a potentially problematic power.
Roderick, really appreciate the analysis. Thank you so much indeed. Roderick Y. from Chatham House.